This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire, which is just launched on Kickstarter.
Our friends at Ghostfire Games are releasing this book packed with over 400 new monsters for 5th edition.
Kelly and I love dark fantasy, and this book is offering an amazing bestiary of horrific creatures, abominations, and undead monstrosities inspired by your favorite tales of grim, dark, dreary monster tales.
Not only that, but this book is going to contain rules for how to harvest monster parts and the crazy items that you can make with those parts.
Also, the book is going to be packed with tons of great advice for dungeon masters on how to make the most of these monsters in your adventures and encounters.
You can follow the links below to join in on the Kickstarter now. And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for dungeon masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
This is part 2 of our subclass tier rankings for the Wizard in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. In this week's episode, we'll be covering the second half of the 8 subclasses that are available to the Wizard in the Player's Handbook, which is going to include the Evoker, the Illusionist, the Necromancer, and the Transmuter.
If you look on the screen right now, you're going to see the criteria that we use to rank the subclasses. We've pitted the subclasses against each other and not those of other classes. Also keep in mind that the flavor and roleplay that you bring to your wizard is not something that we're going to take into account here because everybody might roleplay their wizard differently. Also, the multi-classing that is a potential here is something that we might touch on, but is not a major component that we factor in.
When we rank subclasses, we consider far more than just how well they perform in combat, and look at all the pillars of play, including exploration and interaction, considering how these wizard subclasses might help your mage solve problems, overcome obstacles, interact with non-player characters, and much, much more. These are a little bit separate than the role-playing element because there's more to a Dungeons & Dragons campaign than just fighting monsters and talking to people. There's all the exploration and puzzle solving that comes in it as well.
There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
So let's start this episode off with a bang, which I think actually the first subclass that you played in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
Yes, other than a brief 2-game stint as a rogue, I quickly wanted to roll more dice to do damage, and you told me about how a wizard can cast Fireball, and I went with the Evoker and played that for my first long-term campaign in Dungeons & Dragons.
And we took those characters all the way up to Tier 4 play, so that was a really long and awesome campaign to kick off 5th edition. So we've had a fair amount of experience with the Evoker in actual play.
Yeah, why don't we take a look at what the Evoker gets?
Just as before, also, all these wizard subclasses have their Evocation, Illusion, Savant abilities, so we're not going to cover those again in the individual summaries of each class.
The first ability that Evokers get is Sculpt Spell. When you cast an Evocation spell, you can choose a number of targets equal to the spell's level +1, and those targets automatically succeed their saving throw and do not take damage if the spell would cause half damage on a successful save. Basically creating these little safety pockets for your spells. So now you can fireball with your fighters and barbarians in the midst of it without hurting them.
At level 6, you gain the Potent Cantrip ability. When a creature succeeds on a saving throw against one of your cantrips, and they would normally take no damage, they still take half damage from that cantrip. This is contingent on you selecting cantrips that work based on saving throws, and so this ability has no interaction with cantrips like Firebolt or Ray of Frost, which use attack rolls.
At 10th level, they gain Empowered Evocation. Now when you cast an Evocation spell, you can add your Int mod to one of the damage rolls for that spell.
And at 14th level, you gain the Overchannel ability. When you cast a spell of 1st through 5th level, so you can't use it on high-level spells, and you can't use this on cantrips, you can maximize the damage dealt by that spell. Now, you can do this an unlimited number of times, but after the first time you use this ability, each subsequent use causes you to take 2d12 necrotic damage per level of the spell, and that necrotic damage increases by an additional d12 per spell level each time you continue overchanneling. If you use Overchannel a second time on a 5th level spell, you're going to take 10 d12 damage. This is necrotic damage that can't be reduced or prevented in any way. On average, that's 65 points of damage. And if you use it a third time, that's going to go up to 15d12, which is an average of 98 points of damage. So you have a very high chance of nuking yourself in the process of doing this if you do it a third time, depending on what level your wizard is.
So I really did enjoy playing an Evoker, but I also don't feel like it is the strongest wizard subclass. I do think, though, that there's a lot of fun to be had here, and that the options presented do lend themselves well to the evocation style that most people playing an Evoker are going to bring to the table. The Sculpt spell does offer something really important, I think, for the fact that a lot of us Evokers like to spam Fireball, and now Sculpt spell really saves us from angering the rest of our party by dropping fireballs on the Barbarian constantly. So I do think that Sculpt spell is a great ability. What I misread when I was first getting into Dungeons and Dragons was this ability that adds to your cantrips. My misinterpretation of it led me to believe early on that even when I was using something like Firebolt, which is a go-to cantrip for me, that it always did half damage. Finding out that this wasn't the case actually made this ability feel a lot less impactful for me. On top of that, the next ability where you are adding your int mod to the damage of your spells, it's nice, but also in the grand scheme of the math of Dungeons and Dragons, this actually isn't doing a whole lot. My misinterpretation of this ability again was that this got added multiple times, but it's actually only once for the spell that you're casting. If you're casting something like Scorching Ray, you're only adding +4 or +5 based on your int mod. This really doesn't actually impact much. It sounds nice, but I don't know. When we look at the overchannel, this ability is super cool, but if you use it more than once, the gamble that you're kind of playing with here on how many hit points you're going to lose can actually be a major factor, and I've never been able to decide if it's actually worth it to overchannel more than once before regaining the ability. Taking that much necrotic damage could actually put you in a terrible situation. So I think that there are a lot of cool aspects here, and it does feel like an Evoker. The overchannel feels like an Evoker. The sculpting the spells feels like an Evoker. And these other two abilities that add a little bit are just that. They only add a little bit. I feel like this is a B. I feel like it's a B that people can have a lot of fun with, but I do think that it isn't the best blaster in the game. My favorite is the Sculpt spells, really, and I kind of wish that we could do that with other subclasses, but other than that, it's hard for me to say that this is the best choice, but I still think that it's a cool choice.
I think that this is a relatively newbie-friendly subclass. Sculpt spells is great for players that are new to the wizard playstyle, understand how to use their area of effect abilities, and by the time you get overchannel, you've played enough D&D that you understand its value and you understand the risk that you are taking by using it. A lot of people see 2d12 necrotic damage and go, oh, so that's like maybe 20 points, and don't realize, no, it's like 60 or 100 based on how you're using it. And the potent cantrips ability is a little bit of a because the cantrips that deal the most damage tend to be the ones that have attack rolls involved with them, and the ones that don't, that work on saving throws, tend to have a special rider ability that's what you're casting the cantrip for, right? Like, I'm not casting Mind Sliver or Frostbite because I want to do damage. I'm casting Mind Sliver or Frostbite because I wanted the saving throw penalty or because I wanted to cause the disadvantage. So I think that potent cantrip stock would rise considerably if there was one AoE cantrip in D&D 5e. If that existed, then this would be a much more valuable ability. Empowered Evocation has been intentionally reworded in errata to make it so that you can't stack it on multiple damage rolls, which, to be perfectly honest, I don't really understand the design decision behind having melee attacks and range attacks add ability modifiers to their damage rolls, but not spells. I would rather see abilities like this baked into the core rules of the game rather than given out to subclasses, because they tend to get overrated and they don't add a lot of impact. So I agree with you, Kelly. I think it's a solid B. I think it's newbie friendly. I think it's easy to play. There's nothing about this that is bad. The Sculpt spells is absolutely useful. There's friendly fire with AoE spells and fireball is like a meme in Dungeons & Dragons culture. There's some groups that get really mad about it. And there's some groups where it's always a constant problem because the barbarian always rushes in, they always get themselves surrounded, and man, it would be really good if you could just fireball those guys.
Yeah, and I think like when we look at these abilities, again, a B is not a bad rating, and I actually think the Evoker is a great subclass for people who want to use these abilities. I even think Overchannel, when we played the high tier game, I used it to end some of the high level combat encounters.
Make no mistake, an overchanneled Cone of Cold is 64 points of cold damage, which is a pretty hefty hit to do in an area of effect radius. I think Cone of Cold is the best you can do for AoE, given this ability. But I mean, you can always vary that based on the damage type that you need for the situation, and probably it comes out in the wash.
I think at the end of the day, all of these abilities add something useful. It's just that when you're looking to play the Blaster, this doesn't add enough to make it A or S tier, but it does make you better.
The Evoker does not substantially increase the damage output of the baseline wizard, nor does it propel the wizard into the stratosphere of blasters in any way, shape, or form. It's good, it's not great.
So if we want to completely change gears from the Blaster into the more elusive types of wizards, we're going to go with the Illusion Wizard next.
When you pick up the School of Illusion at 2nd level, you immediately learn the Minor Illusion cantrip, and if you already know it, you get an extra cantrip. The other cool thing about this is that normally Minor Illusion allows you to create an image or a sound, but you are now able to create both with the single casting of the spell.
At 6th level, you gain Malleable Illusion. This ability allows you, when you cast an illusion spell that lasts for more than a minute, as long as you can see the illusion, you can use your action to change it in small ways. It still needs to fall into the parameters of the spell that you cast.
Malleable Illusions is one of those subclass abilities that reveals the design intent of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and how it handles illusion spells. And this is something that is very often misunderstood. Illusion spells that do not specifically say that they can be moved or animated cannot be moved or animated. Illusion spells that do not specifically say that the illusion, once cast, can be changed cannot be changed. If that was the case, this ability would have no purpose. So be careful when you read your illusion spells, for those of you who are not illusionists, because you might be very surprised to find out that you have been using the Malleable Illusion's power when you have no right to be.
At 10th level, you gain Illusory Self. When a creature makes an attack against you, you can use your reaction to create an illusion of yourself in that spot, and you are actually not there to be hit by the attack. You can use this once, and then you need to take a short rest before you can use it again.
At level 14, you gain the Illusory Reality power, which allows you to weave shadow into the energies of your illusions to make objects within it basically real. The spell must be of 1st level or higher, and you need to use a bonus action on your turn to make that object real while the spell is ongoing. The object remains real for 1 minute, and it cannot deal damage or otherwise harm anyone. The illusion will not be able to harm anybody in any way, but you still could make a real bridge or a real wall or a real bucket.
So when I first got into D&D, I went full on into the Evoker, but the more that I play D&D, the more that I love the idea of illusions and messing with the game system with what you can imagine. And I find that illusion magic is actually one of the most versatile and creative forms of magic in the game. Now, because of that, there are some interesting things that we need to take into account here. A lot of tables are going to run illusions in various different ways. Because of that, it can be a little tricky to be as imaginative as you wish you could be with illusions, and you need to really stick to what the spells are saying. That being said, the Illusion Wizard has some really fun abilities. I love things like the Illusory Self. I think that that is just the most Loki thing that you can do. And when I say Loki, I mean Loki, the god of mischief, and the Marvel character, who we actually see use it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe several times to thwart his enemies. He does the Illusory Self constantly, and it's so fun. And it made me actually appreciate that ability more. I think their 14th level ability, the implications for an imaginative player are off the chain here. Even the example they give in the book, we've talked before about how this cool combination of making an illusory bridge and then suggesting that people walk across the bridge. But you can even drop the suggestion part of that, because you can make the illusory bridge, run across it, and then drop that part of it so that it's back to an illusion, so that your enemies go, oh, it's a real bridge, go to run across it and die.
I mean, you can make a cage around your enemies with an illusion spell and make that illusion real. And I would point out that the spell Major Image, when it's upcast using a 6th level spell slot, doesn't require concentration. So you can make an iron box with Major Image, make that illusion real, and now your foes are trapped in an iron box with no saving throw.
I think that I have to give the Illusion Wizard an A. I think that this is a playground for imaginative players to just have fun with what they can create.
I think it's important in rating the Illusionist Wizard to draw the distinction between the subclass itself and the illusion magic that it favors. With the exception of the Illusory Self-Power, all of these spells work on the illusion spells that are actually creating images. So, like, the Illusionist Wizard isn't any better at making simulacrums or hypnotic patterns than any other wizard is. But they can get more out of Major Image than anyone else. And that's really what it comes down to, is essentially the 14th level ability and the 6th level ability are augmenting the Major Image spell. So we have to look at what that spell can do quite specifically to decide on how you interpret it. So I actually feel like we're in a similar place as the Divination Wizard here, where there's a really strong argument for giving the Illusion Wizard an S tier ranking on the strength of the spells. And then but when we look at the actual abilities that the Illusionist Wizard gets, you could play a really fine Illusionist Wizard and not actually rely on any of these abilities. So I think it's an A. It doesn't propel it into this crazy stratosphere. I think that if there were other things that really let you mess with the interpretation of illusion magic, it would really be much better. And I would also say to that again, the malleable illusions is that little kind of like horsefly that's biting me, because it's this constant reminder that what are the designers of D&D 5e trying to tell us about how we're supposed to interpret illusion spells? And I would simply give that reminder of, like, read the illusion spells really, really carefully, because oftentimes players want to have illusions move when they can't. Oftentimes players want to use illusions to make things invisible when the spell doesn't say it lets you make it invisible. Oftentimes players want to use spells to disguise things when the spell that they're using isn't a spell that changes the appearance of an existing creature, object, or environment. So it's really important, if you want to play an Illusionist Wizard, you are going to have a long conversation with your Dungeon Master.
Continuing the theme of problematic archetypes, let's move on to one of my personal favorites, the Necromancer. Now, the Necromancer, when you take it immediately at 2nd level, you are going to gain Grim Harvest. Grim Harvest means that when you kill a creature with a spell, you regain 2 hit points for every level of that spell. If it's a Necromancy spell, you regain 3.
At level 6, you gain the Undead Thrall's power. You add the Animate Dead spell to your spellbook if it's not there already. If it already is, you don't get an extra spell. When you cast Animate Dead, you can also use it to animate 1 additional zombie or skeleton. Finally, undead creatures that you create gain 2 benefits. Their hit point maximum is increased by an amount equal to your wizard level, and they add your proficiency bonus to their weapon damage rolls. And this includes both ranged and melee attacks, so skeleton archers can be pretty scary with this.
At 10th level, you gain Inured to Undeath. You now have resistance to necrotic damage, and your hit point maximum can't be reduced.
At 14th level, you gain the Command Undead ability. You can use your action on your turn to take an undead creature you can see within 60 feet of you under your control. It has to make a charisma saving throw, and if it fails the saving throw, it becomes friendly to you and obeys your commands. If it succeeds the saving throw, you can't use this ability against it again. You can have 1 such creature under your control at any given time, and this lasts indefinitely. The only exception being if the creature has an intelligence score of 8 or higher, it has advantage on the initial saving throw and gets to repeat that saving throw every hour.
So as we get into the Necromancer, this is another subclass that could cause issues at your table depending on the interpretation of it from the players and the DMs. This is another one that you'll want to talk to your DM about. That being said, the abilities presented to the Necromancer are great. They all do exactly what I want a Necromancer to do. They buff my undead, they allow me to raise more undead, I am funneling life force into my own character, and I can create undead thralls out of undead monsters that I find. I am the master of undeath with the Necromancer, and I think that it is actually a superb subclass. The ability to see a Nightwalker, which is a terrifying monster, and if you're the Necromancer at the table and be like, Nightwalker, you work for us now. That's insane. That is a CR20 creature that has low intelligence and dismal charisma.
Now, of course, that is contingent on your Dungeon Master basically giving you the Nightwalker. So we can make the argument that that to say you could control a Nightwalker is inflating the power of this ability, because if you have this ability, probably the odds of you ever fighting a Nightwalker are pretty slim, which kind of is a useful tool on its own.
Yeah.
But the power of the undead minions cannot be underestimated, and I think that bolstered undead minions, they get buffed up in just the right way. They get that little bit of extra damage and that little bit of extra hit points, enough to make them a really considerable nuisance. One of my favorite tactics with playing a Necromancer is to animate a group of zombies and a group of skeletons, who I equip the skeletons with bows. But skeletons can operate siege weapons.
Yeah. And not to mention, so skeletons on the back line means that their squishiness doesn't matter, because you're just pelting the battlefield with arrows. And even if you are summoning the zombies, there's so many ways that zombies can interact with some great spell combinations that we've talked about.
Yes, like having the zombies march forward, grapple your enemies, and then casting Cloud Kill, because the zombies are immune to poison damage, and now the zombies are just holding your enemies inside the area of the poison cloud of death.
The Necromancer, I think for me, I give it an A. I am borderline willing to give it an S. I think the only thing holding me back from that is the fact that it does risk the danger of encumbrance in the time management of the game. And sometimes playing a Necromancer is kind of a jerk move depending on how many players you have at the table. In a smaller group, it might work better. And again, in the hands of a player who can grab all of their skeleton and zombie minions and roll them really quickly and be like, all my skeletons are attacking that unit, here's a bunch of dice and it does this much damage. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm done my turn.
I think if you play Warhammer or 40k, you're going to know how to manage all your minions. You scoop up all your dice, you roll them all together, and you get the thing. Because a group of skeletons following you around, that can be like having animate objects just on all the time. Basically. Especially in terms of the fact that the skeleton archers can shoot people. A group of skeleton archers could really make that evoker go, oh, really?
Yeah, suddenly the Evoker isn't the biggest damage dealer in the wizard party.
Yeah.
It's the Necromancer. I love the Necromancer. I think it's great.
I mean, and that's actually to come back to it with the Evoker in particular. The Necromancer reveals to you just how many ways a wizard can do damage in unexpected ways by using interesting combinations of spells rather than just flat out throwing a fireball. A fireball is a lot of fun. A Necromancer that is using their undead minions more intelligently and using Cloud Kill over the course of an entire combat encounter could get far more out of just animate dead and Cloud Kill than an Evoker could get out of with Fireball and Cone of Cold.
Yeah. What do you rank it?
I give it an A. Yeah, for sure.
So, changing topics, let's move on to the Transmuter. They get an ability right away at second level called Minor Alchemy, and if there's an object made of wood, stone, iron, copper, or silver, they can change it into another one of those options for an hour. It does require concentration to maintain that. Keep in mind that the object cannot be larger than 1 cubic foot, and it takes 10 minutes to complete this procedure.
At level 6, you gain the ability to create a Transmuter Stone. This is a stone that can have one of 4 different powers to you or whoever you give it to. It can either grant that person dark vision 60 feet, 10 feet extra to their speed, proficiency in constitution saving throws, or resistance to acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage. Each time you cast a transmutation spell of level 1 or higher, you can actually change what the stone does, and you can only have one stone in existence at a time.
At 10th level, you gain Shape Changer. This immediately adds Polymorph to your spell list if it wasn't already there, which it should have been. And now you can cast Polymorph without using a spell slot once per short rest, but it has to be on yourself, and it has to be to change into a creature of challenge rating 1 or lower.
At 14th level, you become a Master Transmuter, and this gives you the ability to draw out all the power of your Transmuter Stone and target a creature with a particular effect. Once you do this, the Transmuter Stone is destroyed, so you lose the benefit of your level 6 ability, and you can't make the Transmuter Stone again until you finish a long rest. The first thing that you can do with this ability is a major transformation. You can take one object that is up to a 5-foot cube in size and transform it into anything else of similar mass and value. So unfortunately with this, you can't create a solid cube of gold, because you can't increase the value or mass of whatever you've made. But you could reshape a chair into a different chair or anything else that you can imagine with that. It takes 10 minutes to do this. Alternatively, you can do a panacea, which removes all diseases, curses, and poisons from the creature that you use this on, in addition to restoring all of its hit points. You can consume this to cast Raise Dead on a target. And finally, you can also restore youth to someone, causing them to decrease in age by 1d10 years, but this doesn't actually change their lifespan and won't age them younger than 13. Transmutation is one of my favorite schools of magic. It has some of the best spells in the game, including Haste, Slow, Polymorph, Animate Objects, and the list goes on. Unfortunately, the Transmuter isn't any better at casting these spells than any other wizard is. There are no benefits here that make your Master Transmuter any more masterful at casting Haste on somebody. The sort of once per short rest Polymorph ability is cool, but pretty limited because it's not going to let you do anything like turn someone into a giant ape or a T-Rex. You can turn yourself into a giant eagle with this, or a direwolf, which are both pretty nifty. But I don't think by 10th level, I'm going to polymorph myself into a challenge rating 1 creature. That is not something that I'm going to do in combat, but it is something that I would do for exploration scenarios. Unfortunately, I'm a little disappointed that this doesn't come with some sort of rider that says that when you cast Polymorph, you retain your intelligence. Because again, you're still subject to the normal restrictions for Polymorph. The Transmuter Stone powers and abilities are pretty nifty, but all of them look like feats to me.
They're good feats. They're okay feats.
There's nothing bad about this subclass, but you're missing out by taking it. I think that you can get everything that you get from this subclass just by playing a wizard and taking the feats that you're looking for, and still cast transmutation spells really well and get way more with the other subclasses. You're not going to have a bad character by playing a transmutation wizard, so I don't give it a D, but I do give this one a C because I think it's, unfortunately, for one of the coolest schools of magic in the game, one of the most boring subclasses available to the wizard.
I have to agree with you, and my two statements here are, number one, there really isn't a bad wizard subclass presented in the player's handbook. They're all great. That being said, the Transmuter is my least favorite. I still think that there's a lot of fun to be had here, but when I look at these abilities, when I think on these abilities and the ways that I might use them, what I see are opportunities for creative players to have some fun. But I actually think the Illusionist Wizard offers a better roster of things for a creative player.
Yeah.
The creativity that happens here is what can you do by turning wood into silver? Might be some crazy antics you can get up to there, but I don't really see how that greatly benefits my games of Dungeons and Dragons.
And it's not like you couldn't do that with other spells like Fabricate, Creation, and Wish.
Yeah.
So, and we're talking, the 14th level ability is kind of letting you do some things that you could do, that you won't be able to do till 17th level when you get Wish, once per day. So, that's kind of the weird thing about it. It's like, oh, but you can transmute all these things, and you can change the material compositions. And my response to that is, but there's spells that do that too.
Yeah, and I mean, like, having an ability means that you don't have to blow spell slots, but at the same time, these abilities are just something that I see coming up in weird situations in the game. Like, it's like social or exploration situations where a very niche thing is happening, where changing the formula of something is going to benefit you, which I can see happening a handful of times maybe in a campaign.
But you know what? We've actually had this comment on many of our videos throughout this series about, but if you get this ability, you don't have to use a spell slot or take up a spell known. And my counterpoint to that is that for the wizard in particular, a spell slot and a spell known is a much smaller cost to pay than committing to an entire subclass. Because wizards can swap out their spells all the time. Wizards have lots of ways to get their spell slots back. So saving a spell slot isn't that valuable that it's worth that should be the thing that makes you take a subclass. At least in these cases.
I agree. I think, again, this is a C, not a D, because it doesn't take anything away from the wizard. You're just missing out on the potential of all the other subclasses. And I do think the Transmuter Stone has some cool applications. I actually really like most of the 14th level options, except I don't even get why the younger one is there. Like, okay, you de-age them maybe for like... So
in the playtest, this one could actually increase your lifespan. It could make you immortal. So they changed that because people flipped out about the idea of wizards making themselves immortal.
Yeah, okay, so then I can make my barbarian look like a teenager for some reason, which, again, maybe a creative player has a reason why turning somebody into a younger person can benefit them in a social or exploration form. But I also don't think it's powerful enough for me to argue that it's, oh yeah, that changes the social dynamic of D&D. And it's so niche that I just think the Transmuter doesn't really make me feel like a better Transmuter.
Actually, and looking at the other abilities, the full heal is probably the one that you would end up using the most. You'll use the Raise Dead power if you have to, but like that feels like you're going to use that Raise Dead power to resurrect the cleric, because they were the only other one in the party that could raise someone.
So yeah, at the end of the day, the Transmuter is something that I think a lot of people out there, I think, actually do enjoy the Transmuter. But...
I love Transmutation magic.
Yes.
But the Transmuter, as the school of Transmutation as a subclass?
So up on screen right now, you're going to see our final rankings for these 4 subclasses. But let's take a look at what our community thought.
With the School of Evocation, roughly 26% of our respondents gave it a S tier ranking, and 46% gave it an A, with about 23% giving it a B tier ranking. People love blowing stuff up. Yeah. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. This is a newbie-friendly subclass that is fun to play, and the idea of blowing things up is fun and rewarding. I'm not surprised by this ranking at all, and I think that there's an argument for giving the Evocation Wizard an A.
I absolutely am willing to agree that giving the Evocation an A doesn't make me question that at all. I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right. I think A is a very valid ranking for a really fun wizard to play.
I do think it's a little bit overrated to give it an S rank, though. I think it's good, but going as far as S is too far. It is far and away from. It is not the best blaster in the game.
Yeah. When we move on to the Illusion Wizard, just about 17% gave it the S tier, with 30% giving it the A tier, 31% giving it the B tier, and 18.5% or so giving it the C tier, and just a very small sliver for D. What I think is clear here is that this rides the line of A to B, which I think is actually really appropriate because, again, sometimes illusion magic has its limitations, and there's a lot of questions that come up about the way illusion magic works. So it riding that line between A and B seems appropriate, but I do think that this is a powerful subclass.
It actually reminds me of how the rankings shook out for the wild magic sorcerer, where the community was pretty divided over it. And I think it speaks to the fact that so many different groups run illusion magic in different ways at different tables, and really serves to reinforce that thing that you need to talk to your group and your dungeon master about it before you consider playing an illusionist.
Speaking of talking to your dungeon master about playing things, what do we have for the Necromancer?
We have 8.4 giving it an S tier ranking, 19% or so giving it an A tier, about 31% giving a B, 32% for C, and 9.1% for D. I am very surprised by the D tier rankings for the subclass, and surprised that there were more Ds than S's, because I think the Necromancer is pretty great. This overall is another one of those kind of 50-50 splits between people thinking it's great and people thinking it's bad, which I think continues that argument of you got to talk to your DM about this one.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about the value of the Necromancer, we are looking at its abilities and what they add to the Necromancy style of gameplay. I think a lot of the people who don't like it are looking at those detriments that we talked about, which come in the form of how gameplay is managed at your table, which for me is not what we're ranking overall. We want to give a warning about how it could be managed. But I think overall, these abilities add to Necromancy in great ways.
So I think we're going to say that the community is giving this one a B ranking overall. It's really close between B and C, but I think it's a little bit more heavily weighted if we look at the higher rankings, that putting it at a B for the community feels appropriate.
When we look at Transmutation, this one is only going to get about 5% for S tier, with about 22 to 23% for A. We're looking at 35% or so for B, about 30% or so for C, and about 8.2% or so for D. This is a pretty wide spread, I think, and the Transmuter, maybe people are seeing more in it than I do because there are some popular votes here. I just don't think that this adds anything that meaningful to the Wizard.
It doesn't add anything that meaningful, but it doesn't take anything away either, and the perks are decent. They're just not as good as what the other subclasses give you. The community is pretty firm here in being soundly down the middle at a B, I think, overall, with a little bit more of a heavier leaning towards the low B. It's like a B minus from the community, I think, overall.
So if you look on the screen right now, you're going to see the rankings that we have given to all of the Wizard subclasses so far. And next to that, you are going to see the community votes so far. I think what's interesting is there's an argument to be made that all the Wizard subclasses are pretty great. Mm-hmm. We're trying to add a bit of diversity to our ranking and decide which ones are not adding as much as others. And so there's a bit of a broader range there. But I find that a lot of these that we really like are middling for the community. And I think that that's because Magic is so versatile in how it is accepted by various gameplay scenarios and various tables, DM styles, and player styles. So the whole thing is kind of blown open by this versatility.
Wizards are spoiled for choice. We have already dedicated 2 full videos where we covered 4 subclasses in each just to get through the player's handbook. And now we're going to be doing a part 3 as well. We're going to be covering even more Wizard subclasses. So there's even more to come with the Wizard. They're very spoiled for choice. And I think some of the newer Wizard subclasses have really started to eat the lunch of the older ones in particular. But I do love the school specializations. Like, I love that good old nostalgic feel. And I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, Wizards' class features come from their spell choices and their spell selection. Well, there are some very pointed augmentations to be had with the subclasses. Any Wizard will excel more so on their choice of spells and the application of those spells during your adventures. And so no matter what your school specialization is, it pays to dabble, and it pays to look at every situation with a creative mind.
So this has been a look at the Wizard tier rankings part 2 in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about what you think about the Wizard in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider joining our community by following the links in the description below.
Also, our live play, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, is coming to Kickstarter. We have partnered with Ghostfire Games to bring this campaign to life as a 5th edition module. You can follow the links below or go to DRAKKENHEIM.com to be up to date on all the news involving this Kickstarter. The stories of Drakkenheim are still continuing with our live play Shadows of Drakkenheim that airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes of that show right up over here.
And we've got plenty more guides to all the amazing spells available to Wizards and Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
In the dungeon.